I love Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've known Vince, and I made his first movie and my first movie together. So I had known Tom through Vince maybe for about 10 years. Met him about 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's fun. He's fun. He was up for an Emmy last night, but he didn't win. He should have.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw. It's funny you mentioned Better Call Saul. I was having a conversation yesterday, 2 days ago with somebody, that how you cannot imagine Breaking Bad without Better Call Saul. At least for me, like it's just so interconnected and so seamlessly that it's
It's kind of
absolutely,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. So let's get cracking, Dean. I wanted to sort of start off by asking you how your film career started, the early days.
Well, uh, I guess I'm sort of somewhat traditional from my era. I started making little movies when I was about 16, 17. I had one of those wind up Bolex.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then ended up going to NYU Film School. And all of us coming out of NYU all started taking any job we possibly could because there weren't that many. This would be
Sure.
in the 80s, late 70s or early 80s. So I started shooting a lot of rock and roll, a lot of industrial films for chemicals that will give you cancer, and for corporations, and then documentaries, and as a cameraman, meanwhile trying to make my own little films. And the first little film I made was a little short called Tom Goes to the Bar.
Hmm.
And it was in, because all my friends, we all sort of helped each other. We all lived in the Lower East Side at that time, in New York.
Hmm.
And so we all helped each other's movies. So everybody came and helped, and we shot it over 2 days. And then it's funny, when I shot it, I was saying this to somebody else the other day, I wasn't thinking anyone would actually see it. I I thought, oh, this is something I just wanted to make. My friend, who's a stand-up comedian, calls it the treehouse theory. He goes, oh, you get a bunch of friends together, they want to build a treehouse, and it's really fun. And there's no pressure. You're not thinking anyone's ever going to judge you for it or see it, or it's just something you want to do. And I think that's how I made that film, because I was my girlfriend, who I married later, was Sally Menke, who was an editor, who edited all Quentin Tarantino's movies, and sadly
Right.
passed away about 10 years ago. Sally said, no, we should send this to a film festival. I said, oh, what's that? And so the first one that was happening when we finished the film, and we could barely afford to make prints. We only made 2 prints of this little short film, was Telluride. And so we sent it to Telluride. We didn't know what Telluride was really. And it got into Telluride, and they gave me and Sally and I a plane ticket to come there. And I was like, really, for an 8-minute short? It was just outrageous. We couldn't believe it. And then I go to Telluride, and it's opening the festival, and I sit down, and I'm sitting next to Roger Ebert, and I'm terrified.
Wow.
I mean, just terrified. And because we went from a little, living in the Lower East Side in a what used to be a sweatshop, to Telluride. So it was trial by fire. I still remember introducing it. They said you had to introduce it, and I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm too nervous. And they said, no, come on, you have to. So I got up and I said, I hope you like the film. And then I sat down again. And Roger Ebert turns to me and goes, wow, that was an incredible speech. What was that, 4 letters? But he was very sweet and gave me a great review afterwards. And then it went through the film festival circuit. And I was lucky enough to sort of travel with it for a bit. And because of that, I met a stand-up comedian named Stephen Wright. I don't know if you know who Stephen
No,
was.
I don't. No, I don't.
Stephen at the time had been very successful. He was about to do an HBO special, or he'd done an HBO special, and he had a very similar. I mean, we're still great friends all these years later. He had a very sort of absurdist sense of humor, which we shared, and he asked me to do a little short film with him, and so we did that, and that won an Academy Award. So I ended up here, and then
Wow.
things started happening.
It always takes one thing, right? Just to have a ball rolling.
You just have to keep. I think you just have to keep you have to make something. You can't just talk
Yeah.
about it. You have to
No,
actually make something.
it's so true, because I think I'm going through that phase right now, where you were with your second film, obviously not to the Academy Award level, but you make a film, people see it, and then you got to move on, and you got to make another film, and then you just got to keep going. You just have to you can't think of, oh, this will give me a break, right? Like you just got
No,
to keep at it, keep at it.
but in fact, also, I think you have to like it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have to like what you're doing enough to put everything into it. And I think it's hard now, where I am in my career, not to think of it going to an audience. But back then I really didn't. I just thought, I want to make something I love, right? Oh, this is cool. I like this thing. And I think to make it with a career or an audience in mind is actually a lot of pressure. And it's, in some ways, I always feared that it limited the chances you took, because if you don't take chances, you don't really succeed. You have to go out there and do
absolutely.
things
But
that
it's interesting.
oftentimes people are telling you is crazy.
I do think people in our field or any other art creative field, when you're doing what you love, especially, I'm going to speak about film because that's what I know, we're delusional. We're completely
Oh,
delusional about,
absolutely. Yeah,
right?
I absolutely agree. We are delusional. Yes.
Like
Because,
nobody understands us. Nobody gets us
and really what you're facing is no.
all the time, if not
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
So it is a profession for the insane. Yeah.
Yes. You bring up an interesting point, and I'm going to get to Galaxy Quest, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. This theory of, or school of thought of, do you make a film for yourself, or do you make a film for the audience? Where do you stand on that? I know everybody has different say on that, but where do you stand on that?
Well, I'm the audience.
But when you make a film, do you keep that in mind, that this is how the audience is going to react, or do you just
No,
kind of, no? Okay, that's what I
not
meant.
at all. No, I'm just trying to amuse myself, or entertain myself, or get invested myself. I'm trusting that I'm a good audience. So I don't have to think of. I mean, the danger is if you start thinking about, oh, no one, this is too controversial, or this is too weird, then it's sort of, you don't do things. You're
Yeah,
staying in the middle.
yeah,
I mean, my first short, it starts with a guy. This woman comes into the bar and asks to use a payphone, and then the bartender points over there, and then this guy floats in upside down from frame and just is hanging upside down, and you never say anything about it. He's having a discussion with the bartender and then with the audience, and he's upside down the whole time. And the camera turns to adjust to him.
Yeah.
So everything else, and if I thought about that for a second, I'd go, no one's gonna.
Understand.
Why would anybody see that, right? But that's
Yeah.
too weird. That's too odd. But it was, it was a movie about befuddlement and confusion anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's. I mean, as you go into it farther, obviously the things you're getting are being mitigated for an audience in a sense, without you having to do it. In fact, I always feel like I'm trying to bring it someplace less predictable, or trying to shake it up somehow. It's a very strange, as you said, business for the insane, because there's this push and pull all the time. I do think that it is a team sport, and when you build something with a bunch of like-minded people who are all together on something, that's also incredibly fun. Is building the treehouse. You keep building this thing, and someone goes, well, maybe you should try this, and you're going, no, and then what about this? Oh, that's good, but yeah, we could do that. And now everybody's sort of, adding pieces to this thing that you've built probably for months. They start adding to it, and to be open to that, I think many directors talk about this, that collaboration is about putting together a group of people who are all on the same page with you, or at least at the same sensibility, maybe not the same page. In fact, sometimes it's great when they're not on the same page, because it shakes you up. It also mitigates your indulgence, right?
Yeah, I agree with that comment, and not just in film business, but any business. You need to surround yourself people who obviously are at the same, if not higher par than you, but at the same time who disagree with you, because that's where the best decisions are made. You have that collaborative effort. And I learned that myself too on my first film, which I did completely, on my own, a feature documentary. I decided to edit it myself. It was okay. But then I learned that after I, hired an editor for my second and third doc, I realized, how important it is to have all these different minds and different ideas come in.
It's absolutely true. And the other thing is, I think at my age now is you're going to fail too. And those failures actually bring you to new places, and there's something valuable often in that as well. And that struggle to get something doesn't always work, and you can't always get around the obstacles that are in your way. But years ago, I was introduced to Robert Downey Sr., who was Robert Downey Jr.'s dad, who made really just out there crazy independent movies, Putney Swope and Greaser's Palace and all these insane movies. And I was young, and he said, "Oh, you're making films?" He goes, "Directing a film is like getting pecked to death by chickens."
That's a great analogy. I love it.
And that is the closest analogy I've heard to what it is to direct a movie. Yeah, it's a gauntlet.
It is. I want to go back to you mentioned about your wife, Sally. I'm sorry for your loss, first of all.
Thank you very much.
I obviously, like a lot of people, I love Quentin Tarantino films. I didn't even know he had a designated editor. Would love to hear, like, did you ever work with her, like in terms of on your own project, or you try to separate the personal versus professional?
We had met in when we were in college, so we grew up together side by side, and it became pretty clear to both of us that if we worked together, not only would we not be able to have a family, but we would probably get into some kind of battle. And so the only thing Sally ever cut for me was my very first 8-minute short. And then we decided that we would support each other. It's like I would look at her edit, she'd look at
Sure.
my films, but that we would sort of not do it again. We almost did it once, and we went to a marriage counselor to see if it was a good idea.
That's
But
awesome.
we didn't do it. And it worked out great because Sally had this phenomenal career with Quentin, I mean, with other directors as well, but also we were able to checkerboard our jobs and be with the kids. So we could, you know,
Yeah.
we really a way to figure out how to have a family and also do this crazy job, which often has long hours. So we were able to figure that out. Now I have a daughter who's just graduated AFI. Oh my God.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks.
And another delusional, right, to the family.
Another delusional. Yeah. My son went into, you know, he's in aerospace, so it's a completely different
Oh, yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But go figure.
That's awesome. Well, it's good to have diversity, of careers and stuff.
Yeah, no, it's great. They're both great kids.
One last bit about Sally, your wife, and her editing work before I jump onto Galaxy Quest. Did she edit all of Quentin Tarantino's films?
She started with Reservoir Dogs, and she passed away after Inglourious Basterds.
Okay, but she did up to that point.
Yeah, she did all of them.
Yeah. Which one was your favorite and why? As an audience member.
I mean, obviously, I love Pulp Fiction, but I like Jackie Brown a lot.
That's a great movie, isn't it?
Yeah. But also, there's 2 or 3 scenes in Inglourious Basterds that are just incredible, that are really, that I just love. And it's just, you could see Sally. Sally was just brilliant, and so is Quentin at holding tension, and that opening scene, and also that scene in the bar when they're all have the cards on their foreheads. I mean, that original cut to that scene, one scene, before it got condensed, it worked brilliantly, maybe even a little better, but it was almost 30 minutes, one scene. In the bar, and it was an amazing thing to see, just as a piece of filmmaking in one location, one scene, being able to have that much tension to it, and then of course it erupts, which was something they were both really great at, with holding it, and then it goes crazy. But strangely unviolent, right? Until the last really 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The rest of that scene has no violence in it at all. Nor does the one with the milk, or him getting the strudel in that cafe when he's talking to what's her name? Anyway, they accomplished it. Quentin's an amazing filmmaker, just an amazing filmmaker. I mean, it's just from Reservoir Dogs, I was just like, oh my God,
it was incredible. And I find, I mean, this is with pretty much every good or great filmmaker. Like, when you make a film, each scene should stand out on its own as a short film. So when you watch it separately, but that's with Quentin, and obviously your wife, Sally. If you look at the opening of Inglourious Bastard, as you said, you can take away everything after that scene, and it will look like a short film. Like, that's amazing. And I've learned a lot from that editing, technique, that you have to have a short film with full of, beginning, middle, and end.
Well, Quentin is also writing that way. I mean, those scripts are just incredible, and they're little mini films in themselves almost. He's kind of brilliant, I have to say. And they were, they had fun together too. I mean, I go to visit Sal in the edit room, and you just hear them laughing together.
That's sweet. That's really sweet. Awesome. Thank you so much for that personal insight. I appreciate it. Moving on to Galaxy Quest. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen the making of and all that, but I did see the film recently again after a long time. And it still holds so much heart and so much warmth, and it's hilarious. It's one of the funniest movies I have ever seen. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there, but the humor in it and all that stuff was absolutely tremendous. And how did you get involved in Galaxy? Like, what's the evolution of Galaxy Quest?
Well, it was an accident, like everything.
Yes,
Not quite. Mark Johnson, who I adore, gave me a chance to. I met him after I made my first little short film,
sure.
and Mark is somebody who basically has shepherded all these filmmakers, and Vince being one of them. I mean, Mark did Breaking Bad with Vince. I mean, if it wasn't for Mark, standing by Vince, I don't know if Vince would have gotten that up and going. But Mark and I did Home Fries together, which was written by Vince Gilligan. And Mark would do something. He would sort of, if he found a script or he developed a script, he would sort of give it to first to the sort of his friends to see how they responded to it, and if they had, like most people, he's kind of workshopping it with his group of people, and he sent me a copy of Galaxy Quest, the first draft that Bob Gordon wrote, which was pretty close to what we shot.
Yes.
And I said to him, "Oh my God, that's fantastic." I mean, it's I think the interesting thing about that script and about how I approached it, I think, is that I saw it as a drama that happens to be funny rather than a comedy, which is how I sort of described it later. Because I love at least pushing the comedy towards a very grounded place where it's played as much real behavior as possible, and then you bend it a little rather than approaching it like a big broad thing. I like to look at it first as a drama, as how it plays as a drama.
Sure.
And to have it be absolutely rooted in its characters and in their dilemma. And the comedy comes from the ludicrousness or the misplaced anxiety of those people, and so when I read that, I thought I could see it. I could see the movie, and he said, "How do you like it?" I said, "I think it's phenomenal." He said, "Well, you can't direct." It's a big movie. It's a big science fiction. I've only done a little tiny independent movie, and I said, okay, which I knew anyway after reading it. It's like it's going to be a big it was going to be a big expensive movie at DreamWorks, and Harold was going to direct it, right?
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Why did Harold's last name just jump out of my head?
Oh, I thought you said Sam Raimi for some reason when you said Harold.
No, God, where's my brain gone? That door just Harold Ramis.
Ramis, yes.
Harold Ramis was directing it. He was attached to it, and so Harold was just starting pre-production to cast, and so they had already committed to making it, and Harold didn't want to make it with Tim Allen, and they got into a little thing, and Harold left the project. So Mark, who's kind of brilliant at this, kept them trying to hire people or trying to put an office together, and very sweetly, because he said, now you might be able to do this because we just lost our director. So come in and meet Tim, and we'll talk about it. And so I came in. It was, I think, 7 or 8 weeks before production.
Wow.
And I went back to the actually to a little bit backwards to the script I had liked. We changed the ending to some degree, and we changed it a little bit, but I loved Bob Gordon. I'm still great friends with Bob. I thought he was just a brilliant writer also, and that he's one of those people who dots every I. It's like everything comes back, right? So by Grabthar's hammer, which he hates to say, Alan Rickman's character, now that comes back as something incredibly dramatic that he's saying to his dying friend, who's a fan, who he's now, it basically is like his son. So all of that writing of Bob's is sort of brilliantly constructed, I thought. And so I jumped in. There was nobody else cast. It was just Tim. And so I went and talked to Tim, met Tim, and said, I look at this as a drama. And he's like, oh yeah, right. He's like laughing at me, like, yeah, sure you do. And I'm like, no, it's like, he goes, well, I mean, there are little moments in it that might be dramatic. And I'm like, no, I'm going to approach it that way. He's like, looking at me, where I go, okay. And then I started casting. The first person I went after was Alan Rickman, who I just adored and loved.
Oh,
and then Sigourney, who apparently had been wanted to do it, and I thought was brilliant for the part. I didn't think she would ever say yes. But Mark and I met Sigourney in New York, and she immediately said yes. And then I started casting everybody else, and Sammy Rockwell, I'd known a little bit in New York. He'd done a little independent with John Turturro called Box of Moonlight, and he's just brilliant. I knew Tony Shalhoub. He was actually a neighbor of mine, and he also brilliant. And we just kept that entire cast. Chill came from Home Prize, Daryl Chill Mitchell, and so I just started assembling cast, and we quickly built and rebuilt one of the sets that Harold had started, which was in Harold's tone and not in mine, and so I bent it back into my direction. And remember Tim, for the first week, he's like, oh, this is going straight to video. And then he started seeing what I was doing. And then to his credit, he absolutely rose to that occasion. He really, it turned out that Tim was a really, which I find in a lot of people who started in stand-up or come from comedy, was a wonderful actor, absolutely wonderful. There's a scene at the end of Galaxy Quest where he has to tell Mathazon that he's a liar, he's a fake. And that, even on the set, that was incredibly emotional. Although Alan Rickman would give Tim, crap all the time. Oh God, he just discovered acting, he said. But he was he really, I thought, worked very hard, as did everybody. And then they all became a great little, which is the trick, I think, on any movie, is everybody gets on the train, and they all got on the train together, and they all, most of the time when we weren't working, they were somewhere laughing. And they all stayed friends. That whole group of actors stayed friends for years, as did I with them. We all, I think also DreamWorks at that time was trying to make Gladiator, and Gladiator was having all kinds of problems, so they ignored me. So I was I was running wild. We basically stayed on budget, but we I think they were worried at first because I was an unknown.
Yeah.
So we sent them, I sent them one scene cut together, and they seemed to calm everybody down that I was making the movie.
Yeah.
And then they went off and dealt with Gladiator. When they came back, it was mostly I remember Steven Spielberg showing up during that scene, and he'd only shown up once or twice before because he was an incredibly generous filmmaker, and he understood that if he was there, I would be intimidated by it.
Oh yeah.
And he was incredibly supportive by not injecting himself into the process. He was there. It's like, anything you need, just come and talk to me. But he was not. I mean, he was also busy doing a lot of other things. He's Steven Spielberg, so what does he want to do on my set? But he was incredibly sweet and generous. And I remember when I first met him, it was like, oh my God, I'm meeting Steven Spielberg. And then in about 5 minutes, we're just hanging out talking about movies and having fun and laughing about things. It's different working for a studio that's run by a filmmaker.
Yeah.
It's much different.
Yeah.
That was the best experience of making a movie and being able to make the movie that was in my brain that I imagined. That was the closest I've gotten. And it was a lot of that was because of DreamWorks and Mark Johnson and that group of people. It was just also the luck of that moment,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I don't know if you know about Dean Perlman, who directed House of Sand and Fog.
I know of him. I don't know.
I was speaking to him too. An amazing movie, like an amazing movie.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
And that he was in a similar shoe as you were. That was his first film too. And that's the thing that I always hear. And I remember even when I was running the website, the reason DreamWorks succeeded, among many other things, was there was less, I shouldn't say less, but it was, like you said, like made by filmmakers. So they understood, run by filmmakers. So they understood what filmmakers go through.
Yeah,
right?
They understood the process.
Yeah. I mean, to a studio, like, you're sitting in the office. I don't know if you've ever seen that new series that came out a few months ago. What is it called? The Godfather one, the one they made about how The Godfather was made.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so they showed the Paramount executive and how people, in the office, how they just have no clue what's going on the set, but it's all about numbers, right? I mean, that's their job. But going back to Galaxy Quest, Dean, what I loved about that film, I think you mentioned that, is that the characters were so opposite of each other and so well written that they just worked. Like, you look at the guy played by Sam Rockwell, and then you look at Tony, who I don't remember his character. I think it was Fred that he played.
Yeah, Fred Kwan.
Yeah, they were complete opposite. Like, he was as calm and cool while the chaos was going on, and when there was nothing bad going on, Sam's character was all over the place. And there was that chemistry that you could tell, like you mentioned, right? It was just so evident. And the humor that I was talking about was not necessarily like humor, like, for example, like Dumb and Dumber type humor. It was a very intellectual, smart humor. So I just want to say that what I'm trying to say was fabulous that you did that, I guess.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind. I was trying.
No, I'm not an original Star Trek fan, but I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Right.
So when I saw the trailer, I still remember how I reacted. And when I showed it to my wife and my kids just like a few weeks ago, they didn't get it because they have not seen Star Trek, for that matter. But how much inspiration did you draw from, and yeah, I know there was definitely the older one that was in there a lot, like the way that William Shatner's character was. Were you a fan of Star Trek yourself? If so, which series, and how much of that kind of came in?
I was, but I also I was a fan of it when I was a kid, but then as a college student, we also mocked it, right? So, and yet we loved it at the same
Yeah,
time. So,
yeah,
because it's cheesy sets and over the top, and yet the ideas in Star Trek were actually quite sophisticated, and especially for that time. And I loved the writing in Star Trek. I was sucked into all of it. So I was a fan, maybe an odd fan in a weird way.
not a Trekkie.
Yeah, not a Trekkie, but a fan of the storytelling and of the ideas behind it, especially, and of the idea of science fiction. You know, of a time when we're exploring and learning. You know, so yeah, I loved all of it. I think I had seen all those. I'd seen a lot of science fiction by that point, because I did love science fiction. So it wasn't. It was in my wheelhouse completely. Also, though, it's a story about actors and fans, right? And so I had been to just for research alone, I'd gone to some Star Trek conventions
Sure.
Before, and also there's that great documentary about that woman who was cosplaying a Star Trek character that didn't really exist, that she called the Commander, and she was part of Bill Clinton's jury for his trial, one of his trials, and she dressed in full Star Trek and wanted to be called the Commander, and was part of the jury, and somehow ended up in the jury for a while anyway, before she was dismissed.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
So there's a lot of oddball fan behavior behind it, but I'm a fan, right? So I love that quality we have as human beings to suspend disbelief, you know, to immerse ourselves in something to that degree where we not just fall for it, we embrace it, and then we love it so much that we want to live with it all the time and talk about it, you know, and share it. And that's the quality. It's a quality I think we all have to a certain degree, and it allows us to make and appreciate movies, right? That quality we have as humans, to lose ourselves in story.
Yes,
and
100%.
So to me, it was a celebration of what we do. That movie.
Wonderful. I one of my favorite lines is, I think you were saying it. Obviously the one that Alan Rickman's character says, you know, by Grabthar's hammer, and there was in the beginning when they were at the convention. He goes, "What a saving!" You know, that whole line.
Oh yeah, that's Alan. Alan is a genius. He said, don't. I'm not. He said, don't cut. I'm gonna wait a really long time, because it irks me so much to say this line. Now I'm saying it in a crappy electronics store opening with an audience of 10 people, which is as pathetic as you can get as an actor, right?
Is it true? I was watching it in the making of, I still remember this. There was that scene when Tony was introduced the first time as the actor in the Galaxy Quest series, and he has his like squinting his eyes, and that Tim Allen laughed so much that it took you guys like 4 hours to shoot that take. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, every time, because Tony would never break character, ever. Like, no matter even if he thought it was hysterical, he just had this concentration where he would never break character, and Tim would break all the time. Tim just couldn't hold it in, because it wasn't just Tony, it was like all of them. Yeah, Alan too. I mean, Tim would just die laughing, and then it would get Sigourney going, and then it would like it would fall to bits. But that moment, every time you'd come up and go like this, Tim would just fall to the ground laughing. It took us hours to shoot that.
I wonder if that has to do with the fact, I know Jerry Seinfeld is like that too. I wonder if it has to do with the fact because Tim was obviously on Home Improvement, and their audience is always like reacting, and if that had something to do with that having that TV sitcom background.
It might be. I think it's just that Tim knew what was funny, right?
Yeah.
And I used to, years ago when I first got here, there was a table at Orso that Mel Brooks and all of his friends would sit in for lunch. And I was in Orso with somebody else, and we're overhearing them. And it was the best example of what comedians do, which is you lose if you break.
Yes.
So you're trying to get everybody to laugh, and the longer you hold it, the more tension there is that it's ridiculous and funny. And as soon as somebody laughs, you've won. You got them, right? And you would listen to them at that table, and they would say the funniest stuff you've ever heard and not break the tension, not laugh at their own work, right?
Yeah.
And it was almost like a contest. And I think that there's a little bit of that, but there's also that thing where you get to be when it breaks you down, when laughter breaks you down, you become like a child and you can't control yourself anymore. And you're like a little kid now, and you're like, and the teacher, the teacher is there because there's all these people. It's supposed to be serious and it's lots of money, and all of a sudden you can't stop it. It's infectious. You can't. And Tim couldn't control himself. But really, Sigourney too. Sigourney's very funny, silly, often goofy person. Not the Sigourney you think.
The Ripley, right? That we all know.
she would just crack up all the time.
And one thing I really enjoyed, I at that time I didn't realize it, but being a filmmaker now, I notice it a little bit more differently. The character Brendan and Guy Fleegman, played by Sam and Justin, for me, watching at it just recently, they were actually the audience members in a way. Like they were they were our window into that world. Right?
Yeah. Justin it represents all the fans, and Sam the audience. Yeah.
But how was there when you were filming? I know the script, obviously, there was some scripts locked and everything, but how much improvisation or on the spot, not changes, but semi changes that were made like in the heat of the moment, or if any, can you give me an example of that?
Well, the first thing I will always do is shoot the script, right? Until I think I've gotten it to work. And then I would always, and I've done this to this day, if I'm working with an actor who has that facility, I'll then throw out possibilities and see if we can find something else, find an improv that works. Because very often you see improv and it doesn't fit sometimes. You can feel the improv. But if you're in character, and how you react to something is in character, very often it's wonderful, it's hysterical. And Sam, especially, Sam and Tony were really, really great at improv. Alan would study everything, and all of that was him working it before he got there, right? Alan would study every gesture, or like that beat you're talking about. And so with Alan, it would just stand back and wait. And maybe with Alan, you could throw things at Tim as well. Tim was improving half the time, and I was actually dialing him back into the script. But Sam Rockwell, you could just go, Sam, you've got an itch on your back that you can't reach during this scene, right? And then he would just go into it, right? And you could throw stuff at Sam. And so, but I would say Galaxy Quest, there's improv moments in there. But for the most, I would say 90% of it is Bob's script. I mean, we really were. Bob's script was wonderful. So we were, if we could better at somehow or up it, we would try, but we rarely did. Sam, you know, I mean, like when Sam sees Tony, Fred Kwan and Laliari sink down out of frame where the octopus comes out, where they're obviously having some kind of weird sex down there. Sam just kept throwing out different lines, and that line is an improv, as an example. Like, oh, that's not right, because I was just, you know, going, this is something horrible that you've never seen before is happening on the floor. It's not sex, it's something else, right? It's sex with an octopus. So what is that, right? Just imagine seeing that, and he's like, he would keep throwing out, oh, right. But it's it's a small, you know, 10% maybe is improv, maybe less. I really don't know.
No, I was just making trying to see if there was any particular scene, but I think what I was watching the interview of Sam's, and he mentioned, and then I looked back at him like, yeah, it makes sense. He said he actually ripped his character's fear from Bill Paxton's character in Aliens.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And I saw Aliens again recently, and it was ditto. It was like very similar, only the Aliens was not obviously, you know, like a slight comedy. It was obviously a sci-fi horror. But yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the thing about that was that all of those characters had unique character flaws, right? Which made them the contrast you're talking about, the differences between those characters is because those character flaws are their story, right? And so they're unique characters because they have particular problems. Sam is incredibly insecure, wants to be important, and is a coward. And Tony is a burnout, right? Tony's a complete burnout. We based him on David Carradine from Kung Fu, which was this series in the 60s you would never have seen, where David Carradine is playing a half Asian man by squinting, which is so wrong, right? On every level.
Especially nowadays.
Yeah. So that was us mocking that environment. And Carradine apparently was always stoned. He was a huge pothead. And so he would often forget his lines and just wander off and say things that made no sense. So we never mentioned that. It's never dealt with. It's never defined. But Tony is playing somebody who kind of burned himself out in the 60s. That's who he is. That's who that character is, and lost his confidence and his, you know, it's just kind of drifting aimlessly through life, I think. And that, you know, for a while, he just carried a bag of munchies with him, we came up with, we sort of invented Tony's character before he started, because there wasn't that big a character for Fred Kwan. And then Fred Kwan grew, and that was a Spielberg suggestion, because he must have been watching dailies and he saw how Missy Pyle and Tony were working together. And Missy Pyle was fantastic and clearly a great character. Sure. And he said, maybe they should have a love affair. And so we wrote that in while we were making it. That was invented, and that was Steven Spielberg's idea. Fantastic. But then he had another idea that I didn't use, and I was so nervous about telling him I didn't want to use it. And I finally called him and I said, I don't know how to tell you this. He's like, what? He goes, I don't think that idea works. He goes, you're the filmmaker. That's what you're supposed to do. Wow. Of course. Don't worry about it. It's your movie. You're making it. I'm just throwing it out in case it works. It was like just another moment of wonderful, you know, he was generous. He was generous. And he understood, as you said before, the filmmaking experience, right? I mean, he'd been through that himself millions of times, I'm sure.
And that's why we love obviously his work, but I mean, you keep hearing about his personality and his, it's just amazing that where he is now, with almost 50 years, right? Over 50 years of filmmaking,
Yeah,
and he's still at it, and he's still grounded. Like, he's so grounded, and
yeah.
that's
No,
exciting.
it's you have to work at it.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But what I just want to make a comment. What I really loved, another thing I loved is that a lot of films, I'm not going to name names because I'm not trying to put down any films, when they have like a multi set, like really immense amount of characters, like if it's like an alien invasion or end of the world or whatever,
Right.
those characters, a lot of them get lost, like they don't have an objective, right? Like you have to have obviously beginning, middle, and end for each character. With Galaxy Quest, like each character had a mission, and it
Yeah.
was done so tastefully in such a little amount of time that you didn't feel that it was done overly, or in any way was gone over or under. It was just spot on. I just want to make a comment on that. It was perfect. It was just,
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
bravo to you.
I that's something I love. I mean, even if someone's walking across the back of the set and you never see them again, I usually give them something that, that they're there for, a reason that they're going, right? It's
Right.
like you just left your cell phone in the grocery store, right? And
Yeah.
and your mother's in the hospital, right? So it's like you if everyone on screen has a little tiny mini story, has
Yeah.
a reason to be actively moving forward, then I think you notice it. I think that's what changes it up, and it also gives you it gives you all these moments you wouldn't have had, that you can, like Missy Pyle, right?
Hmm.
She was um, playing this character um, who had never been loved, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that and who was alone, and um, for whatever reason, she just is falling in love with Tony. We built that in because she was kind of playing that. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
No, it's okay.
Um, she's when we were talking about it, it's like those were some of the things that were being thrown out there, and once that was, I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you start to work at it that way, I'm not always
Mhm.
coming up with these ideas. Usually
Yeah.
brilliant actors are coming up with um, those character traits, especially if you let someone uh, build it, right? And we did something that doesn't happen that much anymore. We rehearsed Galaxy Quest. Most movies now just jump right in, and we had 2.5 weeks of rehearsal beforehand where we created Alien School, and every day we'd have Alien School for about 2 hours, and I'd work with all the actors who were playing Thermians, and
Yes.
we'd start to find traits. So that original voice came from Enrico Colantoni, who came in and gave it in a audition, which I thought was brilliant for him to take that chance, right? Because at first he wasn't gonna do it, and
Right.
then he showed me that voice, and it came from an actor's exercise. Of course, he's also a brilliant actor. He'd gone through Yale drama, and it's still incredible. We see each other for breakfast every year for a little bit of bacon and eggs. But but he also, that without that voice, without my hearing that voice and saying, "Oh, wait, that's unique," he brought it to the table, and then my job is to go, "Oh, maybe we can use that," and now we all start to get together, and then all the other actors that are playing Thermians start bringing things to the table, and I'm bringing things to the table, and we're all in this group in Alien School trying to come up with qualities for all of them, and I think the first one we came up with is when we walk, we bring we swing our arms, right?
Yeah,
But we swing them against our legs, the
that's
opposite
right.
direction.
That's right.
So the first thing, once again, I don't know who came up with it. I might have, or they might have. It was like, well, let's try putting the arm with the leg, because they're not really humans. They're, big calamari. So, so let's try that. And it's like, oh yeah, that looks great. That's just odd when they walk that way, right?
Yeah.
When they laugh, they can't control themselves, so they start sounding like their real selves, right? The voice they're using and their mannerisms, everything. And they also are trying to be their actors. They're trying to be the characters they saw in the historical documents, which was the original television show. So they're trying to be like those characters as much as they can.
Yeah.
With those TV safe Beatle haircuts that they gave them in the 60s. Because back then Star Trek was a show for kids, right? So we got to have some. Spock had a Beatle haircut. Of course, it was ridiculous, but so we created those Beatle haircuts and those suits and everything else. But also in Alien School, I guess where I'm going with this long-winded thing is, the fun thing for me is building these characters and building their little stories, and all of us getting together makes this this fun energy where we're all trying to add things to it. What if we do this? What if we do that?
Yeah.
Let's try that. Then we try it and we all start laughing, and then it's like, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. And that's infectiously fun, I think, for people who are working on it, rather than looking at it like, you have 10 hours and it's $300,000 a day, and get this shot, and let's make sure the effects look great. It's always, for me, it's those characters, it's those people. Yeah. And how do you bring all that stuff forward? Obviously, you have to put it in context of something that's a believable universe. I was trying to make the best Star Trek movie world that I could create with that amount of money at that moment in history, because I wanted it to be a little more grounded than it was.
And it wasn't a spoof in any way, right? Like, that's one of the things I loved about it. It was just,
I didn't treat it that way.
Yeah, and it was fabulous, because to me it felt like, and I'm sure to a lot of others, it literally felt like there was a show called Galaxy Quest, and that's what they were going through, and that's what made it so real, right? And
it's not a spoof at all. It's a story about actors who were in a TV show.
Yeah. Now, which brings me to my next point. It was a hard film to sell.
Right? Yes, it was.
From a marketing standpoint. And I mean, it did reasonably well. I think if my memory serves me right, it made 70 million, and it generated this massive cult following. But where do you think the miss was? Was it because it was a lot of competition, or was it because it wasn't something that was understood by the audience when they were watching the trailers? Or
I loved working at DreamWorks, but DreamWorks missed the ball. It was a tone I don't think they understood. I don't think they understood fanboy culture at that moment. They were behind the 8 ball with fanboy culture,
right?
Which is now fan person culture.
Right.
So they didn't think, they thought they were making a movie for kids. And Terry Press came with Katzenberg from Disney, and she had marketed Tim Allen in a Christmas movie, and that's what they were marketing. They were marketing a movie for 12-year-olds.
Oh, the Santa Claus you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and we got it. That's the only time it got contentious with Mark Johnson and I both, and Mark even later on in an article with Terry Press talking about it. But here's the difference between DreamWorks and another studio. 2 weeks into it, what was happening was adults were showing up, not kids, and it was staying the same amount each
Yeah.
week, not dipping, which
Yep,
meant that it
exactly.
was only that it was successful from word of mouth, not from advertising,
Sure.
is what that meant.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't the audience they targeted, and they were it was strong enough where people were saying, you got to go see this. And so Katzenberg called me personally 2 weeks in and said, I'm calling to apologize. We blew the advertising on this. We didn't understand who the audience was. Who does that? And I said, you know, he said, we're doing what we can, but it's really, the ship's already sailed. We can't really do it. It's doing fine, right? It's doing well. But yeah, he called and apologized. So yeah, go figure.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. You know, they were looking at kids, a matinee audience, and those kinds of theaters and that kind of advertising. And we were getting huge results from adults. Kids loved it too, but adults were loving it. And I think that moment in history, that didn't work. It didn't work that way, right? You're a kid's movie, you're an adult movie.
Yeah, Katzenberg, I mean, that's a great gesture by him. He's a very another humble guy. Like, I reached out to him for my first episode and nobody was saying yes. And I just literally thought I would never hear back from him. And he responded me back within 10 minutes.
No, he was kind of amazing. Yeah.
Amazing guy. The music in the film, one thing, obviously, there was a lot of similarities. Being a Star Trek fan, I don't consider myself Trekkie, but that, you know, the tempo and all that stuff. But one thing that really stuck out for me, it was the first time, I think it was when Tim Allen's character is about to leave the spaceship, like the first time he visits it, thinking that it's all like an acting gig. And then when the doors open and you see, like, you know, planet and space, you hear those drums from 2001 Space Odyssey.
Yes.
That was phenomenal. It was very subtle. I loved it. Was that intense?
But David Newman is was just genius. I wanted it to be, you know, to hold on to the absurdity. You can't play goofy comedy music, right? You have to play it straight. So he was playing it straight for one of those big Star Trek movies, but also he's adding things and bending it just enough where it goes a little bit too big sometimes, or when the music happens, it's hitting a moment and rendering it ridiculous because it's asking you to have something else, you know? So yeah, he's also the huge mistake we made in that shot. Well, it wasn't a mistake, really. It was just we didn't think it through. I shot the movie in all the aspect ratios that existed. It starts in television aspect ratio, which is 4:3, which is almost square.
Yeah.
And then because it starts in the TV show, and then the curtains on the TV show, you pull back, and as you're pulling back, you're actually pulling back into 1:8.5, which is 35 millimeter aspect ratio for a movie. Right. But when that shot you just described, when those doors open on the spaceship, it opens into widescreen. But that's 10 minutes almost into the movie. All of a sudden, the rest of the movie is now in widescreen. So what I thought, oh, this is a good idea. When he actually finds himself in outer space, we changed the entire view, and it's now 2:3.5, which is a huge widescreen, right? Yeah. CinemaScope. But you need to tell the projectionist in the movie theater that that's actually what happens, because they open for many of those screenings, they open the curtains to 1:8.5, which is like that. And so that when 10 minutes in, it goes to the wider screen, it was projecting into the curtains. So, great idea, Dean. Yeah. Oh, how filmic, right? Oh, you're going to open up into widescreen. But they had to they had to send all these letters out to the theaters that they need to open up the curtains all the way.
Yeah,
For it to be, because we shot it anamorphic, right?
that makes sense. That makes sense. That's pretty cool. And I absolutely love the 2001 Space Odyssey reference. I'm pretty sure a lot of people picked that up. One thing I didn't
Actually,
know,
nobody has. You're the only person that's ever mentioned that to me.
really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the sets. I didn't know this. I just learned this recently when I was watching just bits and pieces of the making of. I mean, in the Star Trek days, when there was an attack on the ship, they will shake the cameras, right? And that's what I
Yeah.
thought with Galaxy Quest. But you guys actually built a hydraulic set, like where it would shake. How did that come about? Was that like wasn't that like against the budget of the film from a producer standpoint? Like,
Yeah, it was. But well, we talked about because I was going to mock in the TV show, in other words, in Galaxy Quest, the TV show that we shot,
yeah,
we have them running from one side to the other, right?
right,
But we have them. I tried to do it so I didn't practice them too much, so they'd be total off, so you could absolutely tell how fake and stupid it was.
right.
That they're trying to all do it at the same time, which they would try to do in the original Star Trek, and you could always see that it was just so fake.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It was.
so I thought, well, these guys had done that. What happens when they really get terrorized and it's really moving, right? In retrospect, we could have just taken the camera and
Yeah,
shook it, but it sends them all at the same time. But that thing, when we first started it up, because it was on these giant shock absorbers,
yeah.
it was pneumatic, and I had a little controller. It tore the captain's chair right off the deck and sent it flying. It was pretty violent. And when because I was operating it when we were filming, and I had to be careful because they just started slowly so they would not to get too freaked out by it. But yeah, it was kind of crazy. You wouldn't do that nowadays.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, even at that time, yeah. But it makes sense though, from a filmmaker standpoint, that when you're shaking the camera, yeah, the actors are moving around, but they're not experiencing that sheer terror. Like it's not coming
Yeah,
across on their faces. But in this one, it does, especially, and it makes it even worse because these guys are actors, and then they're in the real spaceship. From this film standpoint.
that was my theory. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also Mark Johnson and Charles Neworth, who was line producing, they all thought it was an idea if we could pull it off, and we were able to pull it off. It wasn't. We're still building a set which we're going to shoot on.
Yeah.
It's just elevated, and it's on a gimbal, which people do now. A lot done before. The thing that was different about it was the pneumatic shocks, because it's the same thing. It makes a car jump, right?
Yeah.
You're adding all this air pressure, and it just goes. So it was a little strong at first. We had to calm it down.
Cool. Even the visual effects, like the space, and then obviously the costumes and the sets, especially the computer effects, the VFX. Even in this day and age, some of those, like it looks so real. It was what, 23 years ago, 22 years ago, and it was incredible, the amount of detail, especially when when the spaceship is being taken out, and then it's kind of like go swindling away across the corner, and it's hitting the station, and you can see the debris flying out. And I just got to give kudos on that. Obviously, was it ILM that did that?
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
But we were right at that juncture between practical and
Yes.
VFX. We're right in the middle of that. So I've got Stan Winston doing monsters, right?
Yeah.
But then some of the monsters are CGI, like the rock monster.
Yeah.
We've got practical effects because that's a model, right? That's a practical model of that thing. But it's being animated, and we're adding CGI to it. So it was right, it was in the learning curve, right,
Yeah.
of all of that stuff. So yeah, but a lot of it is practical, because
Do
the
you-
CG was so expensive.
Yeah, no, definitely. But do you think so? The actor, so in the movie, all these actors are playing, all these actors are playing actors, obviously, and then they have, you have Tim Allen's character who's like full of himself. At least that's what the perception was in the beginning of the film. And everybody brought their own qualities as actors in the film that you made. How relevant is that in the real world, or did those actors like Tim Allen and Alan Rickman brought those things with them to showcase in that movie? I'm not saying that actors are, egotistical or full of themselves, but at the same time, they're celebrities. There is that little bit of element of, as a natural human being. How much was that transitioned over, if anything, in your opinion?
I think you're talking about typecasting.
Yes,
Uh,
thank you.
and it's I think that's true a certain percentage of the time for me at casting, and maybe in general also. You to completely chameleon yourself into somebody else.
Yeah,
There's very few people that are able to do that, where you just meet someone that does not exist in their personality. I mean, the personality is part of it, I think, and which is why some people are right for some parts and not right for other parts, right? Um, no matter what happens, you're still seeing that person somewhere in there, or a quality of that person, or but in this case, I would say, yeah, Alan Rickman is a Shakespearean actor, classically trained British actor. Tim Allen is a stand-up comedian who is basically flying by the seat of his pants, mostly, right?
yeah,
And those two are oil and water in person in some ways as well. So they have those qualities. They so I would say yes, to a certain extent, those qualities that they have as people become assets if they're utilized for the characters that have been written. But there are certainly actors who fly in the face of that. I mean, Meryl Streep, it's you watch her become somebody else right in front of you.
yeah. Or another one was Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, yeah.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Although you might say that they have those people in them, but they also might be so incredible at this that they're able to almost absorb another personality.
Yeah, no, yeah, true.
I mean, I started out learning, acting a little bit myself, and going through and taking acting classes, and it's all of those things that you bring to the fore are tools to bring things that happen to you in your experience forward. But the next level of it is something else that if I was good at it, I might still be an actor, but I wasn't. But it's an interesting process. But I think, yeah, for the most part, a lot of those actors have those qualities. And for me, I'm trying to create distinct characters and have distinct character flaws and qualities, and emotional capacities. And so the more, especially in older comedy, I mean, you have the straight man, you have the idiot, right? That's that way for a reason. They work off one another, right?
Yeah.
And the comedy comes from that relationship of those two people that are oil and water.
Sure. Yeah, no, that you're 100%. That's similar with protagonist and antagonist, right? Like
exactly. Yeah.
Right. Like I think probably, maybe I'm wrong, to my knowledge, the first film that kind of showed a bad guy as a main character or antagonist was The Godfather, at least to my knowledge. Maybe there was more
Yeah,
before, and that really works really well because, and then the anti-hero,
yeah.
approach, and same thing with Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad.
Well, what I love is that there's no absolutes, right?
Yeah,
There's no absolutes when you understand how someone got to be that way.
yeah,
So the watching that character become that as a result of things that happened to him
yeah,
or her, in other words, watching, being being privy to their vulnerability, right?
I 100%, and I will attest to that. And I was having this conversation with somebody. We were screening one of my films at an event. It's called Citizen of Moria, and it's about an Afghan filmmaker whose life comes under threat by Taliban because he made a film about them. So to save his own life, he fled Afghanistan without saying goodbye to his pregnant wife and his kids.
Oh,
And he ends up in Europe's worst refugee detention center, where he secretly films, and I kind of team up with him. We both directed this film, and I played on that part of that guilt that he had to live with.
huh.
That he didn't say
Yes,
goodbye.
we're sadists, actually. Yeah.
Probably. And but I mean, it's but that's human, right? Like I think I genuinely feel we all have guilty episodes, so many vulnerabilities. It's just some people show it, some people don't. Maybe people like us put it out in our films in a very discreet way.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're so right, the vulnerabilities, and that's what, again, with Galaxy Quest, I keep coming back to it. It's that those vulnerabilities of each of those character that connects the audiences to the film.
Yeah, I mean, those are the people I love. I love people who
Same.
are who let their guard down and who who I can empathy is the result of that, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I want to I want to care about everyone within the first seconds of meeting them somehow, and that's the trick. Is how do you do that? Um, how do you invest in these characters that you're telling a story about? The same way you do in reality, right? It's like
Yeah.
you start talking and you start learning about what their experience was and what they're afraid of and what they're not afraid of, and who they love and who they hate, and you find out about them, and in that process you start to associate with their story. You start to feel for them in some way, and hope for things for them, and it's the hardest thing as a writer to pull off,
Yeah.
because it has to be so succinct, and sometimes it's not dialogue, sometimes it's behavior, it's subtext, it's all of those things that all those signals that we read that aren't necessarily dialogue, that that make you invest in a character, in their vulnerability. And I think that's the struggle constantly in storytelling.
What I loved you what just said, and I wish all of us, including myself, we're all guilty of this. We all understand that, in the world that we live in today, which is so divided. Like, I think it's divided. People say United States is divided. I think every country now is like that.
Everything, yeah.
And we are so easy to judge one side to the other and the other side to the other.
Yeah.
But if it's amazing when you sit down with someone with an opposing view, you will find that you have I know this is very cliche, but
So
you
much,
find
no, it's true. So much in common. Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible, but we don't do that. We're always just jumping the gun, like making assumptions about people. And
Yeah.
I don't want to blame media 100%. I mean, we're guilty too, but we kind of get all that information from media and we just start making these assumptions. But I hope what you just said is something that we start looking towards more seriously.
Well, it's actually cheap drama.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Media has become cheap drama.
yes,
It's sensationalism, which means that you're just preying on good guy, bad guy fear.
that's it. There's always a boogeyman. There's always a
Yeah.
boogeyman with
And
movies.
so if that's what you're hearing all day long, you start to look at this in black and white and
Yeah,
absolutes. And I'm interested in the gray, you know.
definitely. Definitely. Tell me, Dean, about the first public screening or premiere that you went to for Galaxy Quest and your mindset getting in there and throughout the film screening and then afterwards. What was that like? Do you remember?
Well, that's the moment where I'm most uncomfortable. Is once it's finished and it's not your friends looking at it anymore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, in this case, we had a screening. I s- I had a friends and family screening that went really well, and we didn't even have finished effects in it. And so I had gotten some confidence from that screening.
Sure.
Uh, um, I I I met and was friendly with a lot of different filmmakers, but I still remember um, when I started out with the film festival circuit, I got to know Steven Soderbergh.
Mm,
And Steven, I remember, came to the Galaxy Quest thing. He was still more of an independent filmmaker at that time. He wasn't big Steven. And he said, I had a question and answer afterwards, and he said, don't, you just said, don't do anything. Just keep doing whatever you're doing. He was like, it was a wonderful screening. And then the next day I screened it for the studio and it wasn't as good. So you have these, it's like I come out of that screening and everybody's saying it's
yeah,
doing well. And then the next day, not so good. Then we start screening it for testing, right? So the first testing audience is because they were marketing it for kids, it was all kids. And I was like, what is this? Why are we skiing? Well, that's, I'm talking to Terry Press, who was setting all this stuff up for, who was running DreamWorks
yep, yep.
publicity, distribution, and said, well, it's kids, and that audience didn't go well. And parents were angry because initially there were one or two bad
Yeah,
words,
yeah,
and so those screenings kept going back and forth. But one would be incredible, and one would be like off. Part of that was because the visual effects took so long back then.
yeah.
There are chunks where there's just blue screen, right? There's nothing,
Yeah,
right? Or there's blank, just black, right?
yeah,
And the music wasn't mixed or in yet. But once we screened it for a big audience when it opened, because we'd opened it at the Chinese Man Theater in Hollywood.
yeah.
That was a fantastic audience. It was terrific. And I was so nervous, I don't think I realized it for about 15 minutes that everybody was laughing and clapping. And then I went to a few other screenings. It screened really well from that moment on, but it didn't always screen well. It kept going back and forth. It depended on the audience. The sort of the fandom audience, the movie fandom audience, would go
Yeah.
nuts for it. And then, but the parents with kids audience, yeah, it was fun. It was fun, but it wasn't like they weren't laughing at anything, right?
Yeah.
They weren't getting the intention of it. But it changed. It was a strange experience. It was stranger than anything else I've made, because it was missing and it should have hit. And then it would hit big, and then somehow that wouldn't affect it was odd, very odd. But it did, as I said earlier, it did keep making. It made about 10 million every weekend in a
Yeah.
row for like I can't remember how many weekends, 3 or
It
4.
was 4 or 5 or 6 weekends. It did. I remember the legs, like it had those legs that
Had
Titanic had.
legs, yeah,
Yeah.
which is why Jeffrey Katzenberg called for that reason. It's like that's
Yeah.
what it became apparent that I mean, Mark Johnson said they accused them of leaving their cards on the table, which I think is what they did. But I can't, at this point, I can't be angry. I wasn't even angry about it then. It
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to sell a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I could guess that that they were limiting the audience and that they were selling it, they were downselling it, right, to make it look goofy and silly for kids. But I didn't know any better. I couldn't
Yeah.
say, well, I've sold all these movies or I've made all these movies and you're wrong. I could just argue for the aesthetic of it, you know, for who it was targeting.
I wonder if that was the case would be different if it wasn't released during Christmas.
It would have been different, yeah.
Yeah.
But they saw it, I think they saw it that way, as a Christmas movie with Tim Allen. But
Another, sorry, go on.
no, I was gonna say, but there are a lot of movies that have suffered from this, right?
I was gonna say that.
Throughout history. And it and most filmmakers would go, screw that studio, right? Or blah, blah, blah. I don't feel that way anymore. It's really hard to do this, right? It's about what a culture is ready for at that moment.
Yeah.
What else is going on in the world? How you do the research to try and find what audience is your audience. And it's a reason why the selling of movies is normally boring and middle of the road. You're seeing the same poster with the same phrase and the same voice in the trailer, and it seems like they're selling the same movie over and over again for the last 30 years in general. But then when something really sticks out, you go, oh, that, I want to go see that. But that's a dangerous move to make, right? For them. They just spend all this money, and it's a hard thing to figure out. There are not very many people that are that good at it.
100%. I think the similar fate happened with Michael Bay, also DreamWorks film, The Island.
Yeah.
With the Scarlett Johansson, and I mean, a Michael Bay movie, right? It opened up, I think, with 11 million or 12 million box office. Like, it was just a disaster. And I think Michael Bay also had a similar thought process as you did, but he had a very bold one as opposed to you.
Well, but it's, you know, the other thing is they're trying to make as much profit as they can. They just spend a load of money, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to get every person in every seat. In the process of doing that, you don't sell the movie you made. You're selling a version of what you think will bring those people in. So in a sense, I think there was an article in the Times maybe 10 years ago that talked about the most successful movies were the result of the ones that had word of mouth, because eventually those people are telling their friends they enjoyed it. Now they're telling their friends who they think will also enjoy it, versus trying to get every last person on the planet Earth to sit in the theater. And in effect, they're selling it properly.
Yeah, but
word of mouth is selling the movie properly.
But do you think this is just a thought process you just mentioned? Do you think,
of course, who's going to rely on that? Yeah.
It's also a testament to the film itself? So if the word of mouth is strong, like it was for Titanic, The Godfather, Sixth Sense, Blair Witch Project, I mean, there are tons of them. Do you think that is a testament to the film being unique and great? And where the word of mouth is not that strong, it's the opposite effect, or there are exceptions?
I don't know the answer to that question. My instinct is that it's because the movies were great and maybe slightly ahead of their time in some way, or that they got the wrong audience is possible as well. But there are also movies that a lot of movies that are popular for us now that were ahead of their time, that were not.
Yes.
The zeitgeist was off. It's just they were not. They're not in their moment, and so there are also movies that get better as you watch them. This happens to me with the Coen Brothers movies all the time. It's like
100%
I
I
see the
agree.
Coen Brothers first time, it's like, I love that movie. And then I go back a second time, I go, oh my God, that's so much better than I even thought the first time. It's because you're getting more out of it, because hopefully because it's, because they're brilliant movies, because they're smart, and because there are layers.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there's more to be found there. Once you get through the story, there's more than just the story, right? There's theme, there's weird character traits, so things you love seeing over and over again, how somebody reacted to something. I was watching a documentary on Paul Newman recently, and I remember thinking that, and I still think The Sting was kind of corny, right? As a movie, it's like that music, everything. It's like not really my. Yeah, it's not my thing. But I still remember a moment where Robert Redford has gotten Newman to come and play this con because Newman is the best there is. And Robert Redford comes in and Newman is doing these card tricks, and all of a sudden the cards go everywhere. And Redford has this look like, oh my God, this guy's a fake. What have I done? Right?
Yeah.
It's just a piece of behavior. And I still remember that. I was a little kid when I saw that, right? It was like that made me laugh, and it made me laugh again. Because they were both on their game, but also it's a great little moment, so yeah, who knows? We like to revisit those things, I think.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah,
but I think there are movies that got lost. I mean, there are movies that
I
got lost
agree.
that nobody ever saw that were brilliant. And they get brought back sometimes, but it's hard to bring something back too. Yeah, well, what's a movie that you thought was absolutely genius that just never got?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, there's so many, nothing comes to mind. I remember when Shawshank Redemption came out,
Right,
it tanked.
that's
Like
right, it tanked, yeah.
it tanked, but it got nominated and it won a lot of awards. I don't know if it did win awards, but it became like one of those films that everybody talks about to this day.
One of those films that I thought actually just came to mind, that you just jarred my memory, is Badlands. Do you remember Badlands? Terrence Malick's first film?
Yes,
It's
amazing.
beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful, and way ahead of its time. I mean,
there's so many great films out there that go unnoticed. I just saw one recently, and I highly recommend that you watch it. I think it's on iTunes. No studio want to pick it up. It's a Spike Lee joint production. I won't even tell you what it's about, because don't even watch the trailer. Just watch the film. It's called American Skin.
oh wow,
It's really good. That's all I will say. It's really, really good.
yeah.
But
But
again, not many people saw it.
yeah, so who knows? I mean, Galaxy Quest having legs was a surprise to me. It
Yeah.
was a surprise.
Hello.
Oh look, girlfriend.
I'm sorry to
I'm on a
interrupt.
That's
podcast.
okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. You can
I'll be
ask
right
him
back.
that. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, she can talk to you for a second.
Oh, that's all right. She's that's my partner, Chesney. Because I'm usually in here on some Zoom meeting, right? So it's
That's okay.
it's funny. But yeah, that's Galaxy Quest was a surprise. I mean, I saw it happening at the time a little bit, mostly because of fan culture. But it's odd because you finish a movie, it goes out, it does whatever it does, and that's
Yeah.
it. It's over. You never think about it again. I never see them again.
Yeah.
I don't think about them again, and I'm moving on to the next thing. And this keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And it's a strange. It's a great feeling. It's rewarding. It's great. But it's also surprising. To me, it feels like it's of. would do something different. I mean, there are things I would change in it, right? I would.
Oh yeah, that's always the case though. And I think now that you mention it, I mean, I don't, I'm sure there are more, but Galaxy Quest is one of those films that I don't think that did well as it was supposed to do. I mean, it still makes me laugh, not because it's hilarious, but because it's smart and hilarious, right? It's just very properly like, just like a musical track, like when every note works and you have an amazing theme like Jaws or E.T., like that's what Galaxy Quest is. And it just didn't
Wow,
work.
geez,
Yeah.
thank
I
you.
genuinely,
Very
no,
sweet.
I really admire that film a lot. I mean, and this is out of being biased for DreamWorks. I mean, DreamWorks made some not so great movies, but films like, especially in that era of 1998 and 2002, like
They
American
made some
Beauty,
great
Saving
movies.
Private Ryan, Almost Famous, Gladiator, Galaxy Quest. I mean, there's so many more, Shrek.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, it just has something in it. And film is psychology, right? Like it's all
yeah.
about and it triggers something with us that we don't even know what it is, but we just like it. We admire it.
Well, I'm flattered and thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It was fun. All I can say is it's the closest I got to making what I imagined, and it was really actually incredible fun making that movie. And we all enjoyed each other,
Sure.
and so I think that I keep trying to recapture that. I mean, I do to some degree,
Yeah,
because I think it also eventually, hopefully, translates to an audience at some point.
absolutely. I'll ask you one more question. I'll let you go, sir. There's always talks about sequels, right? And I mean, it's been 23 years, but has there ever been like a serious consideration, because it's has a strong fan base?
We had a serious consideration. Um, uh, Bob Gordon came up with an idea which was even more meta, like 3 levels of meta farther than Galaxy Quest was
Mhm.
in absurdity. And we were going to make a limited series, and we were in talks with Amazon. And Alan died. And it just took the wind out of our sails.
Yeah.
And we couldn't figure it out without him. And so we all just went, okay, never mind. That idea is still there. Bob still has it. Mark Johnson is still trying to keep it alive. Other people, I think, have tried. I think Simon Pegg tried. There's some other writers that have tried, but it somehow it just didn't work.
Yeah.
I think also the farther away from it I get, the more I don't want to do it. Just because I don't want to, it seems to have done as well as we could have expected.
Yeah.
Why start
Exactly. I'm glad you said that.
and that I mean, I've been involved in things that were, number 2 or 3, and it's very, very difficult
Yeah.
to get that spirit back again, to do what you did the first time. It's just somehow it's the result of that moment, that time, those people, that screenplay. And when you keep trying to, I mean, people have done it for sure. I mean, I think I may have almost done it once, but this recent time with Bill and Ted, I think
Oh, right. Yeah.
we discovered a midlife version of Bill and Ted, but it's much different than the first 2, and you couldn't have. Even that tone was not my tone, and I don't know. It feels like you really. I mean, you do have Godfather 1 and 2.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Right. So this has been pulled off, and it's really tempting to do it all the time because you
Yeah.
love those characters. But I'm not sure. This is the one to do it with. But there seems to be a lot of people keep trying. There's somebody now who's called me and said, we have this idea. Would you be on board? And it's like, I always will entertain it. And who knows? I don't know. I know it'd have to be. I don't know. I think it'd have to be much different.
Yeah, I genuinely believe. I mean, maybe you realize this too. I think because Alan Rickman is no more, I think that has sort of taken the interest level down on your part.
Yeah,
Right?
it was like we couldn't recover from that. Getting them all back together again, and doing this, it would have been 10 years later, and they all were actually in worse shape
Yeah, yeah.
because they had this secret that they couldn't betray. So it was actually a fun idea, but I think yeah, probably not.
Well, thank you so much, Dean, for your time.
You're very welcome. Please
love-
edit out all the boring stuff, and all the stuff that sounds like
No, it was all fun.
pontification.
I'll edit out your partner walking in, but other than that, all is staying in.
Oh, she'd probably like to be in.
Okay, I'll leave it in then. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll leave it in. Well, thank you, Dean. It was I had a play. It was fun. It was really fun. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, you're great. I mean, this is fantastic. Do more.
I will email you about that. I probably will seek your guidance on that.
No, you're great at it. It's really you're incredibly you're fun to talk to, and you're really smart about filmmaking and movie making. Being when you're a filmmaker yourself,
Thank you so much. That's
it makes it so much easier than tell us some funny anecdotes.
No, that's a very generous comment. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dean.
All right, you take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.